Marvelous hello, friends and loved ones, and welcome to another entry of indie games inspired by Megami Tensei. People seem to like that last video, and I've got way more games to talk about, so here I am with another 5 titles that you may want to check out if you're a fan of Atlus's beloved franchise. Once again, a few quick clarifications on what I mean by all this. A Megami Tensei indie has to have some sort of verifiable statement from a developer, or publisher, or someone who worked on the title making the comparison. I'm also mostly sticking to smaller studios, so basically, no. A GameRant article saying that Scarlet Nexus reminds them of Persona 5 doesn't mean I'm going to talk about that. I'm also not including any Megami Tensei fan games that use names, characters, or ideas that already exist in the franchise, though, I don't know, MegaTen fan games could be a fun video to do one day too. And just real fast, if you like what I do, please consider commenting, subscribing, and or checking out the Patreon. It honestly makes a huge difference. But alright, let's get to the games, shall we? So, the first game I want to talk about is one that I immediately went into with very high hopes for one specific reason. See, on my spreadsheet of Megami Tensei inspired indie games, I always mark down how the game highlights where it took inspiration from. Normally, this is something like a tweet from the developer said they were inspired by SMT, or a Kickstarter blurb mentions Persona. But the Steam page for Lotus Reverie First Nexus from Chronicles Lobre actually compares itself to Devil Survivor of all things, and I love those games. I mean, yeah, it mentions Persona 2, but come on, Devil Survivor. And it's actually really easy to understand and see how this game uses that specific series to build itself, from both a narrative and mechanical perspective. You play as... Look, I don't actually know, but I pronounced it as Sink, an amnesiac young woman in a black cloak who stumbles upon a castle with 6 other survivors living in it. After a horrible incident, known only as the incident, billions of people were wiped off the face of the earth. However, only half of the handful of remaining survivors are actually human, with the other half being the linked partner of a surviving person known as a tulpa, who have their own personalities and are indistinguishable from a human being. If a human dies, so does their tulpa, and vice versa. But tulpas are immortal outside of having an incredibly short lifespan, and the only way to extend that lifespan is to challenge another tulpa host pair to a duel and kill them. These rules are mostly explained to the player via a giant black monolith in the middle of the city, because Lotus Reverie is essentially a death game at its core. However, and I'll acknowledge this is purely my own personal bias, there's no fun death game mascot character to enforce the rules or go to the players, and that's something I always really like seeing, so I am a bit sad this game doesn't have that. The rules state that the game will end when there's only one pair left, so as cheery as the characters try to act toward one another, they all know they eventually have to fight, and the game basically states they already have several times before Sink even showed up. Players can spend time around the castle in a system that is very similar to Devil Survivor. You have main story events that you eventually have to do, and side story events that allow you to grow closer to some of these characters. By the way, I recommend saving before doing any main events in this game, because sometimes you'll need to make choices. But it's not really in the this choice will affect the plot sort of way, it's more in the anything other than the right choice means you immediately die sort of way, so yeah, save your game. And regarding those side events, I have to admit, for a good while, I really didn't want to do any of them. Because at the start of this game, I did not like any of these characters. And it wasn't in the Danganronpa way, where their faults and negative traits did a mostly good job of building tension. I just thought they were kind of annoying.
Shut up! Oh my god, I don't care!
However, those of you that are paying attention will notice I said I didn't like them at the start of the game. Lotus Reverie is absolutely a slow burn type of title. I spent the first several hours of this game just feeling utterly exhausted by every single character just trying to out-quirk each other, as if the quirk gods would declare one of them as the one true Quirkules. But I can say it does pick up. Unfortunately, that slow burn, overly quirky stuff is mostly what I'm showing you all here, because once the main story gets going and you start figuring out which characters are human and which are tulpas, and especially as you learn more about Sync and her partner and start having duels against the other pairs, yeah, it's engaging stuff, and I legitimately don't want to spoil any of it here. While certain scenes can feel like they drag on, especially when they're trying to be funny, the game does take its main premise seriously enough. I was actually pretty surprised that in the heat of the moment, I found myself really caring about a character that 20 minutes ago I was saying, "Shut up, just shut up, I hate you two," while rolling my eyes and mashing the A button. But speaking of those duels, let me try and describe the combat in this game as nicely as I can. It's stupid and I hate it. It may try to lure you in by claiming to be a traditional SRPG, but it's this weird system where you have to plan out your move ahead of time and set the character's AI regarding different opponents to specific patterns, and everybody moves at the same time, so depending on the set AI, you may actually move where you didn't want to, and look, simply put, it's just not that fun. Now look, I want to be clear, I do not dislike this combat because I dislike strategy RPGs. Quite the opposite, actually. Final Fantasy Tactics, in my top 5 favorite video games of all time. Devil Survivor Overclocked, my second favorite MegaTen game. Fire Emblem Three Houses and Triangle Strategy, my number 1 game of the year for 2019 and 2022 respectively. Demon School, a Megami Tensei inspired SRPG launching next month, been one of my most anticipated titles for several years. Jeanne d'Arc? I don't have a single sweeping statement for this one, it's just really good, and available on modern PlayStation consoles now, and more of you should play it. The point is, I like SRPGs, and for the most part, Lotus Reverie First Nexus ain't that. The combat is just frustrating, and it's not very fun, and it never feels all that rewarding. And I think perhaps even the developer knew all that, because the game asks you multiple times if you want to just turn the combat off entirely and just not do it, as the game lets you choose between battle mode, where you do the fights, a novel mode, where they just describe the fight in the visual novel style the rest of the game has, and a mixed mode, which is just both, for those that don't want to miss anything. The only downside to turning off the combat is that you can miss out on some of the trophies and achievements, but I'm playing the Switch version, so I don't even think that actually matters for me. Oh yeah, this game is available on most consoles, which is pretty cool. I know a lot of the games I cover in these videos are only on PC. Alright, so let's quickly recap. The story takes a while to get going, and the combat is unsubtly unfun. So, do I recommend Lotus Reverie First Nexus? I honestly do. The general premise and sense of intrigue once the story gets going is legitimately compelling, and I was really excited to see where it goes and how it ends up. The mystery alone of trying to guess who's a tulpa and who isn't makes it particularly engaging. But one last thing I feel I should clarify is that First Nexus subtitle, because this game does end pretty openly. Don't get me wrong, you get closure on some stuff, but there's clearly more planned for the Lotus Reverie world. The only real word on Second Nexus I was able to find was through a Patreon post from the developer mentioning it that was dated only a few months after the launch of the first game. As of right now, over 3 years later, there doesn't seem to be a Steam page or much indicating that Second Nexus is still happening. If it does, I'll absolutely pick it up and maybe even talk about it on a future entry in the series. Hopefully it'll have better combat. Next up is Dark Blood Chronicles from Homage and Blossomsoft, which technically came out in December of 2013, but according to the dev, it was only available for about a month before it got pulled. The game came back with a Kickstarter page in 2014 that described it as an old-school RPG inspired by Persona, Parasite Eve, Shadow Hearts, and Clock Tower. The point of this Kickstarter was just to help fund visual improvements to an already finished project, but it only raised $369 out of a roughly $11,000 goal before being cancelled. However, the fully finished and visually enhanced version of the game did eventually come out in November of 2017 and is available on Steam, which is the version I'm playing for this video. You play as Samantha, a young girl who goes to school one day only to find it totally abandoned and filled with monsters. With the help of her friend Ethan, the two fight their way through the school, solve a weird series of statue puzzles that seems really out of place for a high school setting, and eventually get sent to the Dark Realm by one of their classmates, a girl named Sin. Once in the Dark Realm, the two teens get separated, and Sam finds herself on a vague hero's journey to accept the power of warrior souls based on the Zodiac, and eventually take down an evil entity and presumably save the Dark Realm. The Kickstarter mentions a Persona comparison, but I think this title is much closer in scope to Shin Megami Tensei, especially SMT If, with the narrative themes of having a classmate send you from a school setting to a dark demon-infested realm. Except for, oh yeah, the part where Sam can straight up summon a persona, like they actually call it a persona. Aside from Samantha and Ethan, you also have Eon, a mysterious woman inhabiting the Dark Realm that Sam meets shortly after arriving. Even though you only have these three party members, a minor complaint that I have is you never have all three characters together until pretty late into the game. But a feature that I love is the Monster Tome, which allows you to have a fourth party member in the form of a familiar, and this is essentially the game's version of demon collecting. Most of these monsters have static movesets and equipment, and a kind of annoying thing where none of them can attack. They all just have to use a skill to do it, but there is a lot of variety here. Some of the familiars you get from finding them in different dungeons or encountering them on the overworld map. Others you may get from leveling up one familiar until it kind of basically evolves, but an aspect I really like is that you don't lose access to the old one when this happens. And then there's one familiar you get just from buying the game on Steam and booting up a new file. Creator of the game just flat out gives it to you.
Thank you, I deserve this.
Because there are so many different familiars in the game, you're definitely likely to find one that you like, whether it's for their design, or their moveset, or whatever. I know this Minotaur saved my butt more than once, and kinda spoiler warning I guess, but you can even unlock Sin herself if you want someone with a bit more narrative weight. Obviously, these familiars don't have as much personality as your main party members. Heck, they don't even really have any battle animations or victory poses like your main cast, but you'll probably find yourself attached to them all the same. I know I did, and I really did enjoy this system. As far as the actual combat goes, it's fine. It's pretty standard, all things considered. You have normal attacks, and then you have like techniques and abilities. It does do this one thing I'm not a huge fan of, where it separates your skills into different menus, but it's never like, oh, one menu is physical attacks and one is magic attacks, and I'll admit sometimes I just had trouble remembering which menu certain skills were under. The game uses an ATB system, except battles freeze on your turn anyway, which I think actually defeats the point of an ATB system. It's more of a get really annoyed and frustrated when every single enemy gets a turn right before your bar finishes filling up system. Like, look, I don't hate ATB combat, but I think Dark Blood Chronicles misses the mark on what makes that style work, and it should have either gone all the way to do it right, or just stick with regular turns. Like I want to be clear, it's not bad or anything, it's just not doing it any favors. One part of the combat that I do really like is Sam's soul system. You can equip different souls in order to learn new moves by acquiring special points after battles. You can only use the moves associated with a soul when you have it on Sam, but once you max it out, you can visit a fortune teller who will lock the skills onto you, so you can use them even if you put on a different soul. However, you can only do that with 3 mastered souls at a time. Basically, this allows for a lot of customization option for Sam's moveset, And since the souls can also affect her elemental weaknesses or resistances, it's a good idea to think hard about which ones you want to keep on and which skills you want unlocked through the fortune teller. By the way, I recommend always having some healing spells on Sam because some of the enemies in this game hit like a truck. Visually speaking, Dark Blood Chronicles has this distinct style that, I'll admit, tickles a certain pleasure area of my brain. It's like a blend of Top Cow comics with Gaia Online. All three of the main characters are visually distinct, and most of the familiars are unique enough that, again, I'm sure you can find one that you love for their design. I do wish that the characters had facial portraits when they speak. It seems really weird to me that they don't, since they do all have character art, and the screenshots of the old version of the game from that Kickstarter I mentioned has portraits. Regarding the world, though, I found nearly all the locations have a nice dark horror vibe, whether it's underground catacombs, or creepy churches, or war-torn battlefields. Even the main town has this gothic aesthetic that I really enjoyed. Honestly, with how much many of the areas in the Dark Realm are fleshed out, one of my biggest complaints is that all of the battles take place in this empty grid void. It feels less gothic horror and more Mega Man Battle Network. Almost every dungeon in the game has different types of puzzles, and most of these are perfectly fine. But toward the end of the game, they do start going with some of my least favorite dungeon tropes in games, like pitfalls and teleporters, so yeah, some of them got a bit old for me after a while. The music in this game is pretty great, with a lot of ambient tracks mixed with some good rock music. Honestly, I was a huge fan of the overworld theme, which made looking for secrets a lot more enjoyable. And also, there's this fun little guitar riff whenever you get pulled into a battle. Dark Blood Chronicles has multiple endings depending on your dialogue choices and how much your party members actually like you. While the game is decently long, which may have you wondering whether or not you'd want to play through it again to see any of the other endings, I found out that with enough patience, money for items, and a bit of saving and reloading, you can see all 5 endings without needing to beat the entire game again, so that's pretty cool. Overall, I found myself enjoying Dark Blood Chronicles. It provides a good sense of world building, and the characters, while nothing too special, help keep the plot moving, and it's fun to learn about the rules of this realm and what your actions are building toward alongside Sam herself. The game is only $10, and I think it offers more than enough to make it worth the price of admission. Exodus Checkmate is a game that comes to us from Brazilian studio Ninja de Lua. It was released episodically, with the first chapter coming out in August 2022, and the final chapter launching quite recently in June of 2024. As stated in many tweets from the developer themselves, the game takes inspiration from Shin Megami Tensei, Persona, and also Mary Skelter for any fans of that particular series. I've never played it myself. Perhaps what I found the most surprising and intriguing about Exodus Checkmate is that instead of taking inspiration from the social elements of Personas 3, 4, or 5, they actually claim Persona 1 as the main inspiration, and I could definitely see that, and not just because it's a first-person dungeon crawler. The game takes place in a sealed-off school, and all of the dungeons are these pocket dimensions called game boards that you can access through rifts that open up in the school. Every world has a ruler that you need to defeat, and it reminds me a lot of the Snow Queen quest, which is one of my favorite Persona stories. You play as Ray, who is sleeping in class one day and is bestowed upon the Black King. You quickly team up with Quinn, who has the Queen piece, and as you continue to work your way through the game, you'll unlock other girls who each take the form of a specific chess piece. And before you ask, yes, because this is a game where you're the lone guy in a party full of distinct and unique hotties, of course there are some social mechanics, affection events throughout the dungeon, and romance options for your favorite girl. I like Sheila. She's tiny and snarky, and her being the pawn piece makes her feel like the underdog, but hey, you choose whichever girl you like best. But just so you know, apparently a lot of folks agree with me that she's the best, because even the dev told me that like half the people he's talked to love Sheila. I already mentioned that you visit these game boards through rifts called gates, and they all have their own themes, puzzles, and things to discover. While your initial goal is to learn who the king of each board is and defeat them, you can always revisit the worlds to unlock new events or find secrets. Battles, like the dungeons, are all first person, and this game has a pretty interesting take on magic and skills. There's no MP or SP in this game, but every spell has a cooldown period. So if you use Quinn's fire spell, you'll have to wait 2 turns before you can use it again. However, Exodus Checkmate has its own ideas for the classic Megami Tensei advantage system. Hitting an enemy with a spell they're weak against will lower the cooldown period, but hitting them with something they repel or drain will lengthen it. Of course, even things like healing spells have a cooldown period, so I'm going to give this game credit for being an RPG where I actually got a lot more use out of items than I usually do. You've also got super powerful check moves that you can activate after filling up this gauge, and these are usually really powerful attacks, good healing spells, buffs, and other helpful abilities. Now, regarding the visuals, I love the visuals in this game. I adore these character designs and the artwork. Like, all of the party members look great. The antagonists all have distinct designs, and even the monsters are fantastic, with some very fun and memorable takes on mythological figures that would look right at home in a MegaTen game. Even the minimap is vibrant and has that Danganronpa blood pink that makes it pop in a way that really works, and the game's UI has a lot of visual flair that I can't help but appreciate. A common problem I have with a lot of first-person dungeon crawlers is they just have this issue where a lot of the dungeons feel too samey. But Exodus Checkmate doesn't really have that problem as you explore lush jungles, skeleton-filled prisons, the inner workings of a computer. Because each game board comes from the thoughts and feelings of the king who rules it, there are plenty of distinct regions to encounter as you work your way through the game's 5 chapters. Now, I will admit there are a couple of small issues here and there. For example, the game was originally in Portuguese, so if you're playing the English version, you will encounter a fair amount of typos and grammatical errors, and in some cases, a few lines that just didn't get translated at all, but you can still usually piece together what's going on well enough. There are also some issues with the mini-map where it doesn't update as you explore, and will eventually just explode into fully mapped areas. So, admittedly, it can be a bit tough to figure out where you have or haven't already been. Though that issue kinda goes away on its own after the first few dungeons, it's admittedly a little bit bizarre. Either way, I recommend zooming the minimap out if you plan to even remotely keep track of where you're going. Overall though, I really liked Exodus Checkmate. It's a little rough in places, but the places where it shines are absolutely phenomenal, and I can't praise them enough. I really like the chess motif used throughout the game, and it does a good job making all the characters and their dungeon crawling designs feel really unique. The game does a nice job of characterizing the kings of the game boards, even the ones you may not spend a lot of time interacting with. With a unique cast of characters, fantastic art and use of color, and an engaging turn-based battle system, Exodus Checkmate is a game I can highly recommend and think is well worth checking out for yourself. It's only on itch.io right now and not on Steam or anything, but that shouldn't stop you from giving it a go and letting the developer know what you thought of it. It's a smaller studio, but I was really impressed with what they put out here. Now, bear with me, but the next game I want to talk about is Culina Hands in the Kitchen from Lakeview Interactive, which came out in 2016 after a successful Kickstarter campaign that described it as a visual novel/restaurant sim hybrid inspired by Persona 4 and Hot Dog Stand the Works. I'm playing the game on Steam, because even though one of the trailers said the game was coming to the Xbox One, I'm not sure that it ever actually did. Also, I don't own an Xbox One. In Culina, you play as a recent culinary school graduate, Chris Carlson, or as I named him, Ratatouille Moneybags. And would you believe that I already have something to complain about on the very first screen? The game says that it's Friday, February 17th, 2015, and devs? February 17th, 2015?
It was Tuesday.
I know that's a super nitpicky complaint, but it would have been such an easy detail to get right that I'm just kind of confused. Don't worry though, I'm sure I won't dwell on it too much. So, as the Kickstarter description said, Culina is a blend of restaurant management and social sim. You'll need to go buy ingredients from a range of meats, vegetables, and spices, and then make recipes consisting of at least one ingredient, but a max of only one per category. This is a pretty fun system where you can customize and even name your dishes, as well as decide how much of a markup you're going to put on them. Toward the start of the game, your dishes are going to be super simplistic, like pork belly with salt and pepper, or a limited time only item that I put on the menu that I called just breadcrumbs. That'll be $10. Your early guests aren't looking to spend a lot of money, but you still need to turn a profit, and ingredients are stupid expensive in this world. $3.20 for a carrot? Fuck you, Paul, I'm glad your ex who runs the spice shop broke up with you. $4.96 for a single bulb of garlic? Fuck you, Lisa, I'm glad you broke up with Paul. Wait. Besides those two lovable characters, you've also got Claire, the short stack who runs the butcher shop, Katie, the head server at your restaurant, and lastly, I'm excited to let you all know that this game features Dante! Not from the Devil May Cry series or anything, it's just a guy named Dante. While each day has multiple time periods, you can only hang out with one person per day in a social link-esque system. Because of this limitation, it is legitimately impossible to max out everyone's links in a single go. So you're gonna just want to focus on 2 or 3 characters in a given run, and probably only emphasize one character to actually try to max out. However, it's not a bad idea to get closer to the shopkeepers, as they do offer discounts on ingredients at certain levels of friendliness. But I guess the main question to ask is, are these social links any good? How do I feel about these characters? Truthfully, most of them range from fine to pretty solid. Dante is stoic, so it's nice seeing him open up a bit. Claire is super flirtatious, and she's got moxie. And Paul is constantly sleepy. #relatable. Honestly, I think the worst character in the entire game is actually the protagonist. He's pissy, he's childish, and he's even pretty mean-spirited at times. I specifically went for the platonic route with Claire because the protagonist constantly compares her to his ex, and frankly, I think Claire deserves better than the guy we're playing as. Oh yeah, and you can also hang out with your ex, but like, I didn't, because why would I do that? So, I don't have any footage of that. At the end of each week, you're required to have a certain amount of money on hand, so as the game progresses and these thresholds get higher, you'll eventually need to focus on spending money to expand your restaurant seating capacity and advertisements to draw in more and different types of customers, on top of buying the world's most expensive artichokes. You can also spend time raising your unique cooking traits, like healthiness or creativity, but, you absolutely do not need to. Like, at all. I will admit I had a bit of trouble accomplishing some of these goals at first, and that was even using the moneybags cheat at the start of the game. Even if you meet all the thresholds, you can still get what feels like a bad or unsatisfying ending by not growing close enough to any of the characters, on top of accomplishing the business objectives. The main goal at the end of Culina is to try and impress a food critic, and you've really got to bring your A game if you're gonna pull that off. But I want to impress the critic, because she's hot, and I kinda want to give her a smooch. By now, I can probably guess what some of you are asking. How the heck is this game anything like Persona? And truthfully, I think that's a fair question. In fact, one of the big reasons why I wanted to talk about Culina today was actually to try and make a point. While I can definitely see how Persona's calendar system, traits, deadlines, and social events were inspirations for many of the mechanics in this game, I think we can all agree that there are certain themes, elements, or ideas that we kind of expect from a game that claims to be inspired by Persona. And Culina, Hands in the Kitchen, while by no means a bad game for it, just doesn't really have those. In my last video, I talked about Wood Salt, which was also primarily inspired by Persona in the form of its social mechanics. In fact, the devs actively bragged about that game's lack of RPG or battle mechanics. However, Wood Salt took place on a space colony over 1,000 years in the future after Earth was attacked by SMT-style demons, So I felt like it still had some semblance of that blend of mundane yet fanciful that I look for in this type of game. The closest I can really say that Culina comes to matching that type of energy is that Claire named her dog Garm after the Norse myth, and that much like in a real Persona game, the hottest character that I'm the most attracted to is not a viable romance option. Oh yeah, and after you beat the game for the first time, you unlock Culina, the Spirit of Cooking, which was a prequel game that came out before Hands in the Kitchen. This game shows off your protagonist while he's in culinary school, his friendship with Paul, and Paul's relationship with Lisa and stuff. It's a good little prequel story. However, this one doesn't have any restaurant management or social elements and is purely a visual novel, so I won't dwell on it too much as it doesn't really have that Persona inspiration. But once again, I have issues with the calendar. This one starts on Friday, August 9th, 2013, which is accurate. But the story jumps around and quickly stops making any sense, like skipping to Saturday the 18th, which was a Sunday, Tuesday, February 17th, 2015, which is correct, but if you'll recall, was the day that Hands in the Kitchen supposedly started, and then it shows the protagonist graduating on Thursday, February 17th, 2016, you know, the 1-year anniversary of the start of Hands in the Kitchen, and also February 17th, 2016 was a Wednesday, and then it immediately jumps backwards in time to February 2nd, 2015, which was a Monday, even though this game says Thursday, and it follows up on events that we just saw happen in 2016, and I'm sorry, I know this is a long rant, but I seriously cannot imagine it would have been that hard to consult a calendar when putting this timeline together. However, you know what, I will say this, if Culina is actually dealing with restaurant management, social elements, and time paradoxes, I may have to rethink my doesn't have any themes or ideas I expect from a Persona-type story stance. I want to re-emphasize that I don't think Culina Hands in the Kitchen is a bad game. In fact, I think the game manages to do a pretty good job balancing the restaurant mechanics for those who don't usually like the monotony of a straight visual novel, without making that system too overbearing and fast-paced for those that prefer the straight visual novels. And for those of you that don't want a straight visual novel, you can date Dante if you want. It's a perfectly fine little experience with decent characters, good music, and a solid, albeit simplistic storyline. I may not find myself saying, oh man, if you like Persona 4, you're gonna love Culina Hands in the Kitchen. But if you like restaurant management games and think the social mechanics are a welcome addition to that, you might like it for what it is. I've honestly put way more hours than I initially expected into the game, and I've even beaten it a few times to try and see different character endings. Man, this game just made me wish that there was some sort of restaurant management game with social elements that did capture the sort of stuff we usually want from Persona. Like, how cool would that be? Like, if only something like that existed. If only. If only. I mean, if only someone would just make a game like that. Affogato, by Chinese developer BeFun Studio and published by Spiral Up Games, is exactly that. Okay, you run a coffee shop instead of a restaurant, but beyond that, it is everything I was hoping for. Look, I usually try not to give away too many of my thoughts too early in these sections, but let me just say this. Affogato came out just last year in summer of 2023, and if I'd known about this game and played it back then, not only would it have been in my top 10 games of the year, it probably would have been my number 1. No offense, Danger-esque the Rumisode Triungulate. The only thing is, I was debating for a bit if this game was actually eligible for this video. Sure, if you search around for Affogato and Persona, you're gonna find plenty of game journalism pieces making the comparison, or tweets talking about it, or even videos from other MegaTen creators, but I wasn't able to find much from someone actually involved with the game making the comparison. Until I stumbled upon a Reddit Q&A from the publisher where they said, one of our inspirations were story-heavy games like Persona 5, and that's good enough for me. You play as the titular Affogato, not to be confused with the Italian dessert combining espresso and gelato, but rather a red-headed witch that...
不是红发，是品红。
Oh, sorry, my bad. A magenta-headed witch that opens up a coffee shop called Witchery with her demon partner, Mephisto. The game operates on a calendar system that's divided into 2 main time periods, and you can do specific things during each one. Maybe you want to run your coffee shop so you can earn some extra money and pay your rent on time. Maybe you want to go out and explore the city, find someone to talk to, and raise your relationship with them. Or raise one of your social stats so that you're able to form closer bonds with some of those characters. Or maybe you want to activate your witch senses and purge the inner demons from possessed people using the Distinct Spirits of the Tarot deck in a fun and engaging reverse tower defense game that's super good and incredibly rewarding. Like, seriously, this is fun. I like this. I've said time and time again that I believe Atlus could make a perfectly good Megami Tensei game out of any genre. So it's always really cool to me when I see these indie games try something we don't usually see from that franchise, whether it's tower defense, visual novel, or yes, even a restaurant management sim. You have limited resources at the start of each fight, so you need to choose your units carefully as they explore the board, but you also need to choose the order you deploy them in carefully, because each familiar in your tarot deck has specific abilities. Some can attack while others can't. Others can help collect resources, and some will provide beneficial buffs, like healing your units or boosting their defense. Affogato and Mephisto need to investigate peculiar happenings going on in the city, which are usually related to demonic possession, like the first major character being a seemingly unpopular transfer student who used a demon's powers to become the most popular girl in school. You need to spend certain periods investigating different areas and hunting down the right information before you can take on the big bad demon in an engaging boss fight. Of course, you only have a finite amount of time to look into these events and take care of it all, but you also need to earn enough money to pay the rent on your shop, so there's a pretty nice balancing act when it comes to your time. At least in theory. See, you earn so much more money from combat than you do from running the shop that I personally didn't see much reason to use one of my precious time slots to open Witchery for the day. You do have a nice selection of customers that come into your shop, and it's cool to get to know them over the course of the game. One minor complaint I have is that early on, the game doesn't really warn you what will or won't take up your time. For example, one evening, I was all set to go take care of a story-related mission, but then I saw someone I knew and was like, okay, I'll see what they have to say. But that conversation automatically roped me into a social event that took up the rest of my evening. Then I tried to go take care of that mission again during the next time period, but when I finished it during the day, it basically skipped my evening time slot and took me straight to the night. Because you only have such a finite amount of time to do things, it was a little frustrating not knowing what would end up eating my available slots. But overall, yeah, I adored this game. The visual charm is a huge part of that. I love the performances of the Chinese actors. It made me feel all warm and fuzzy seeing all the different coffee drinks that you can make. I even enjoyed the simplistic minigame of actually making the drinks by dragging ingredients and using the machines. I like that you can dress Affogato in different outfits, and it even changes her dialogue portrait. Overall, I love the relaxing elements of the coffee shop, and just seeing all the different coffee options felt great, and it created this cozy experience that blended really nicely with the inner demon's frantic battle mechanics. So, yeah, absolutely loved this game, highly recommend it if you haven't heard of it until now. Like I said before, I honestly wish I'd known about this game sooner. This was a really great time for me, and yeah, it doesn't hurt that most of the cast, much like Exodus Checkmate, is comprised of cute girls. And Dr. House for some reason. Alright, and there we go. 5 more Megami Tensei inspired indie games. What did you think about this particular lineup? If any of these games sound interesting to you, I've included links to all of them in the video description. Please feel free to check them out and show the developers some love. And hey, if you know of any other Megami Tensei inspired indies that you think would be good for me to talk about down the road, let me know about them in the comments. And if you're a developer working on a title that fits the bill, definitely let me know about that. I absolutely want to hear about that. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, take care.